Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that somewhere behind closed doors, powerful men are making decisions that could erase entire cities, destroy millions of lives, and reshape the future of humanity forever. And you would never even know their names, never see their faces, yet your fate would be in their hands. Because this was the reality of the world in the first half of the 20th century. A world still bleeding from the wounds of the First World War, a world filled with broken promises, economic collapse, and silent anger. Especially in Germany, where people felt humiliated by defeat, crushed by poverty, and abandoned by the international community. And in this atmosphere of despair, a man named Adolf Hitler rose to power by promising pride, revenge, and greatness, telling his people that they were destined to rule again, that their suffering was someone else's fault, and that only absolute loyalty could save them. While across the world, other nations were also turning toward militarism and dictatorship, believing that strength mattered more than morality, that conquest mattered more than peace, and that fear was more powerful than cooperation. And as the Great Depression spread poverty and unemployment across continents, democratic governments seemed weak and slow, while authoritarian leaders appeared decisive and strong, creating the illusion that tyranny was the solution to chaos. Slowly, almost quietly, the world began sliding toward disaster as Japan expanded through Asia, invading China and committing brutal massacres, while Germany rebuilt its army, ignored international agreements, and absorbed neighboring territories without serious resistance, because Britain and France, exhausted by past wars, chose appeasement, hoping that giving in to small demands would prevent a larger conflict, not realizing that every concession only fed greater ambition. Until finally, in September 1939, German forces crossed into Poland, tanks rolling through towns, bombs falling from the sky, families fleeing in terror. And within days, Britain and France declared war, beginning what would become the most destructive conflict in human history. At first, the Axis powers seemed unstoppable, using lightning-fast attacks, modern weapons, and coordinated air and ground forces to crush their enemies. As Poland collapsed, Scandinavia fell, and France surrendered in shockingly short time, leaving much of Europe under Nazi control, while Britain stood alone, battered by relentless air raids, yet refusing to surrender under the leadership of Winston Churchill, whose words gave hope to a frightened nation, reminding people that even in darkness, courage could still burn. And although Germany failed to invade Britain, the war continued to spread, growing larger and more dangerous with every passing month. In 1941, Hitler made a fatal decision by launching a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, believing he could conquer it quickly, sending millions of soldiers eastward into vast lands and brutal winters where supply lines broke, resistance stiffened, and hope slowly froze into despair. While in the same year, far across the ocean, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, destroying American ships and killing thousands in a single morning, pulling the United States into the war. And under the leadership of Franklin D. Roosevelt, American factories, workers, and scientists mobilized on an unprecedented scale, turning the nation into an industrial powerhouse that produced planes, tanks, ships, and weapons faster than any enemy could destroy them, transforming the conflict into a truly global war that stretched from frozen Russian fields to tropical. The war reached unimaginable levels of brutality, with cities burned by firebombs, soldiers dying by the millions, and civilians trapped between advancing armies, while in Nazi-occupied territories, entire populations were persecuted and murdered in an organized campaign of genocide, revealing how far human cruelty could descend when fueled by ideology and fear. Yet even in this darkness, resistance movements formed, spies risked their lives, and ordinary people showed extraordinary courage, proving that humanity had not completely disappeared. By 1942 and 1943, the tide began to turn. As German armies were defeated in massive battles in the east, Japanese fleets were broken in the Pacific, and Allied forces pushed through North Africa and into Italy, slowly tightening the circle around the Axis powers. And in June 1944, Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy in a daring invasion that opened a second front in Western Europe, facing machine gun fire, mines, and chaos, yet continuing forward, because retreat meant failure, and failure meant the prolongation of tyranny. And from that moment, Nazi Germany was pushed back step by step, city by city, until Soviet forces closed in from the east and Western allies advanced from the west, meeting in the heart of Europe. In the spring of 1945, Berlin fell after brutal street fighting. Hitler took his own life, and Germany surrendered, ending the war in Europe. But in the Pacific, fighting continued as American forces battled their way toward Japan, facing fierce resistance on every island, where soldiers fought to the last breath, convinced that surrender meant dishonor, until finally, in August 1945, a new and terrifying weapon was used, as atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, instantly killing tens of thousands and changing the nature of warfare forever, forcing Japan to surrender and bringing World War II to an end. When the guns finally fell silent, the world stood in shock at what it had become. More than 70 million people were dead, entire cities lay in ruins, families were shattered, and generations were scarred by loss. While Europe was weakened, new superpowers emerged, and political tension soon hardened into the Cold War. Yet from the ashes also came new efforts to preserve peace, including international organizations designed to prevent such catastrophe from ever happening again, and advances in medicine, technology, and science that would shape modern life. World War II was not just a story of armies and leaders. It was a story of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, of fear and hope, cruelty and compassion, destruction and resilience. A reminder that when hatred goes unchecked, it can consume the world. But when courage and cooperation unite, even the darkest chapter can eventually end. And today, as we look back on that era, we are not just remembering history, we are listening to a warning that peace is fragile, that freedom is never guaranteed, and that the choices we make today will decide whether future generations inherit a world of harmony or another age of fire and shadows.